So now I would like to go through a few insert statement examples using the person and the car, just as I mentioned previously. So the person owns the car, and we're going to create a set of two database tables that allows us to use this information. So remember, we can't insert into a record or into a table unless the table exists. So we must create it first. And I will provide this script for you. It's called person_car.sql, and that will be located on D2L along with the lecture materials for this particular video. So if I run this, we can refresh our table list, and we can see that we have a car and a person now inside the database. Our person has a person ID, a name, a birthday, a street address, a city, state, and a zip. So I'm just going to create a new SQL tab, and I'm going to start by inserting a record into this table. If we remember our keywords, we have to have insert into, and we also need the name of the table that we want to insert the record into. So person. We could potentially specify the column list here, and I'm just going to say that for now. The next thing that we would add is values. And that also is a comma separated list. So the first thing we want to do, instead of specifying the column list for now, let's just get rid of that. And let's enter a value for each of these columns. So person ID, let's say that's 1. And let's make sure this is a numeric value. It is an integer value. 1, let's enter my name. I'll enter a birthday. Let's see. Let's do December 1st, just so you can see how that works. How do I know that that's the order that we're in? Well, I'm matching the same order as our column list on the left. So I have person ID, I have a name, I have birthday. The next thing is street address, and I'm going to put the address of the Brinkley Center, which is the Brinkley Center is where we hold most of our classes on the main campus, and the city is Johnson City, Tennessee, and the zip is 37614. So let me go back and check to make sure that I've got, okay, so these are character fields, so I have to include quotation marks around all of them. So single quotation marks around all of them. So this should work. So when I click insert, we say one row affected. So now let's review the table, and we can see that that particular thing is in the table. Now, what if I change this slightly and we'll change the birthday we'll leave the address the same. I changed that slightly. Notice what happened. We get an error code, duplicate entry 1 for key person primary. So our primary key here is the person ID, and that means that we cannot have a duplicate value there. So I'm going to have to add a different person ID for this record. When I run that, it should work correctly. So when we refresh, we have two individuals now whose address is the Brinkley Center at 2001 Millennium Place. The next thing I want to show you is inserting into car. And we want the values for that. So let's look at the column list. The VIN is first. And let's see what type the VIN is. That is a variable character. The make, the model, manufacturing year is an integer. So let's say I don't know, I just made something up there. So that's the VIN. The make is a Honda. The model is an Accord. Manufacturing year is 2016. Manufacturing date is 2015, September 21st, 2015. The dealership, Johnson City Honda. And the owner ID, well, let's say that I own that car, so I have to point to person number 1 from that foreign key. This will indicate that I, in the person table, person number 1 owns the car HGJ12G4. Okay, so if I run this, it had a duplicate. Oh, I'm sorry. I doubled this. So I should run the one under my cursor. If I do that, it actually allowed me to insert the Honda Accord into that table. So let's take a look at that. So this says I have a Honda Accord from 2016. It was manufactured on September 21st, 2015. It was at the Honda dealership in Johnson City, and it was owned by person number 1. Person number 1 happens to be Brian Bennett. Okay? So now let's add multiple records to our table. And I'm going to change this back. And of course I was born in 1999, of course. But to do this, I have to delete records from person. Okay. I delete those records. Well, it says you can't delete that because there's a foreign key that's pointing to one of the records. Let's say Cascade. Oh, actually, instead of doing that, what I want to do is delete from car and person at the same time. But I have to delete from car first because I had that row pointing to person. Now I have the row pointing to car. Okay, now I want to insert into the person table 2 records. So let's refresh the person table, make sure that there's nothing in it. When I run this now, it says 2 rows affected, and when we refresh here, we see that now those 2 records are there. Another thing we need to look at is what can we enter into a table that's not null. So the only thing that's required in this is the person ID and the person's name. So let's try this, the person ID and the person's name, and get rid of the rest of it. Everything else can be null. That's okay, because the only things in the person table that have to be present are the person ID because it's the primary key, and the name here because it specifies not null. So let me try to do the deletions, and then let me try to run this. When I run this, I get an error. Column count doesn't match the value count at row 1. That means there are more columns in the person table than I have values for in my values list. To correct that, I can add a column list and say I just want to insert the person ID and the name, because all others can be null. And now when I run this, okay, it says duplicate for name. I need to go back and delete these again. Okay, then run this one. Now the insert worked correctly, and I should be able to refresh this and notice that there are nulls now in all of the empty spaces that are displayed under birthday, street address, city, state, and zip. If a column is required, it must be in the column list here. If a column is required. And you could do the same thing, a similar thing with the insert into car, where you list the VIN, the make, and the model. Those are the three things that are required in the car table. The VIN, the make, and the model. So if we wanted to create multiple cars, we can do that. And let's say this is a Mazda. It's a 626. Older car, but that's okay. So again, it says column count doesn't match at row 1. So we must specify the columns that we want to insert those values into. So I want to insert that first column into the VIN column. I want to insert the second column, Honda or Mazda, into the make column. And then the final one, Accord or 626, that's the model. So now when I run this, I can run the entire script with that first button. Notice that it inserts 2 records into that field, into that table. So when we refresh our table, we see this. Now, notice that nobody owns these cars. Nobody owns these cars. So we do need a way to figure that out. So I'm going to also include here the owner ID. And that means that I have to have, because I have 4 columns listed, I have to also have 4 columns listed in the values list. So the Honda Accord, we said, was owned by person number 1, and let's make the Mazda 626 owned by person number 2. And when I run this now, the entire thing, then we see 2 were inserted. Now the Honda Accord belongs to person number 1, the Mazda 626 belongs to person number 2. So that means that John Doe owns a Mazda and Brian Bennett owns a Honda. So these are some simple examples of insert statements that you can try on your own with this particular set of tables that I've provided the SQL script on D2L for you.